News for you, you can't wake up and be Mad Dog yourself. You can't wake up and be Adam Shaw. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people.
Stephen A. Smith has finally lost his patience, openly blasting Molly Qerim after she shocked ESPN by locking in a huge new contract with NBC Sports. What appeared to be her greatest career achievement has now spiraled into a heated feud, bruised pride, and a growing TV rivalry that could reshape the future of sports broadcasting. How did things reach this point? Let's break it down. Molly's sudden departure that rocked ESPN to its foundation. Stephen A. Smith has finally snapped. The man who once defended Molly Qerim, praising her as a trusted colleague for more than 10 years, is now taking aim. And it's all triggered by her groundbreaking deal with NBC Sports. What was supposed to be Molly's defining professional moment has instead morphed into one of the ugliest sports media clashes in recent memory. Tonight, we uncover how a long-running on-air partnership collapsed into hostility, why Stephen A. feels betrayed by Molly's jump to NBC and the jaw-dropping industry truths ESPN tried to bury. This fight isn't just about contracts. It's about influence, about who controls the sports media empire. And as you'll soon discover, the most shocking parts are yet to come. The off-air remarks Stephen A. made thinking the cameras weren't rolling, the rumors around Molly's real reason for ditching ESPN, and inside leaks on how NBC outbid the worldwide leader in sports. But first, let's revisit the exact moment the shift happened. Molly's unexpected departure from First Take. Nobody had a clue. She was moderating on Monday, and by Tuesday, she was gone. No farewell broadcast, no personal goodbye to the audience, just a cold Instagram story in silence.
Somebody that I have leaned on many occasions in the past, as she has done when it comes to me, the partners on the show for the last 10 years. And a lot of times, some of these things happen, and it's just uncomfortable.
That was Stephen A. live on air, visibly unsettled. But insiders claim that behind the scenes he was livid, furious that the show he carried had lost its moderator overnight, and even angrier that ESPN's executives couldn't prevent it. If you take the official narrative, it was simply a money issue. Sports Business Journal revealed that Molly turned down an extension and wanted to chase new ventures. ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, explained, "We were more focused on our contract lasting to the end of the year. The surprising part was just the timing. But let's be real. Timing alone doesn't explain Molly's overnight disappearance. Timing doesn't explain why Stephen A., who often boasts about protecting colleagues in contract disputes, suddenly seems so defensive when pressed about whether he tried to keep her at ESPN. And timing certainly doesn't explain why NBC swooped in only weeks later with a multi-million-dollar deal. Here's the truth. Molly wasn't just quitting a role. She was breaking free from a system where Stephen A. pulls in $20 million annually, while his co-hosts and moderators earn only a fraction of that. A setup where, as one analyst put it, when you pay Stephen A. Smith $20 million, whoever sits next to him is going to demand a massive payout. And that's when tensions began building. When ESPN re-signed Malika Andrews, when Mina Kimes secured a fresh contract worth nearly $2 million, when Shannon Sharpe arrived with huge hype, and that's when Molly looked around and thought, I've been here for a decade. I've kept this show steady through countless debates. And yet, when it's time for ESPN to reward me, they hit me with a lowball offer.
Wow, so obviously this is pretty obvious. At least from Molly's point of view, I don't think it was the most amicable.
No farewell, no graceful transition. Just what one analyst described as a harsh, emergency-style exit. Still, ESPN tried to spin the narrative. Magnus told The Athletic that Molly wanted to pursue different projects and that her vision didn't align with the company. But here's where it turns complicated. If this was purely professional, then why did Stephen A. jump almost instantly on his Sirius XM program, dropping cryptic lines about people forgetting they still answer to someone?
Wake up and be Mad Dog yourself. You can't wake up and be Adam Shaw. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people to handle.
Notice how he carefully avoids saying Molly's name. He keeps repeating, "I'm not referring to her." But the hidden meaning is obvious. Who else had just walked away from ESPN in a contract standoff? Who else wanted a bigger stage? Who else dared to question whether Stephen A. was untouchable? It could only be Molly. And the fact that he kept denying it while hammering the same point made things even more transparent. This wasn't just a business rift. This was personal. And that's where NBC enters the picture. Here's the twist. According to several reports, Molly already had interest from rival networks while her ESPN contract was stuck in limbo. One insider speculated, she must already have a gig lined up, and it has to be with a competitor. That prediction proved true. NBC Sports, struggling to reinvent its mornings and counter ESPN's dominance, saw Molly as a golden opportunity. A well-known face, proven ratings, and above all, a figure who could add legitimacy to a network failing to craft a personality-driven debate show. Stephen A. saw it coming. That's why the same week her NBC deal was leaked, he shifted his on-air sermons to talks about humility, value, and knowing your role. To fans, it sounded like bitterness, like a man blindsided by his own teammate. And honestly, who could fault Molly? After 10 years of cutting off egos, managing live chaos, and being sidelined as a mere accessory to Stephen A.'s empire, she finally gambled on herself. And NBC didn't hesitate. They backed the Brinks truck. But here's the real bombshell, which we'll unpack later. NBC didn't just hand her a hosting job. They gave her power, executive producer credits, multi-platform projects, creative control to build shows her way, things ESPN flat out denied her. So while Stephen A. ran about how everyone has a boss and you can't set your own value, Molly was already sitting with NBC executives designing her future. And that's when Stephen A. snapped. The public only witnessed Molly's calm farewell. After much thought, I've decided to close this chapter and step away from First Take. Hosting this show has been the honor of my career. It seemed polite, even heartfelt, but insiders point to the real emotion beneath it. Frustration from years of being overlooked and underpaid. Because the truth is, ESPN has a long track record of undervaluing its women stars. Jemele Hill carried champion Michelle Beadle. Each carried shows, each boosted ratings, yet each walked away under messy circumstances. Now, Molly is part of that list. Meanwhile, Stephen A. remains ESPN's towering figure, its $20 million man. He even brags, in fact, that every morning he wakes up with one thought in mind.
How do I get my bosses more money? How do I get some?
That's his mindset. Not about lifting up his co-hosts, not about protecting his crew, but about how to turn them into profit and secure his own cut. And that's exactly why Molly's move cut the deepest. By walking away and inking a deal with NBC, she dismantled the system that always kept Stephen A. at the center. She refused to keep playing his game, and the proof is right there in his voice. On his radio show, he framed her departure as a lesson in humility, a warning to anyone else in the business.
We don't get to define our own value. We don't get to define our own worth. We don't get to sit there and summarily say, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do.
Seriously, who else could he have meant? This wasn't some vague life advice. It was a disguised shot. And the irony? This is the same Stephen A., who spent years flexing his market value, pressuring ESPN until they made him the network's highest paid star. When he demanded bigger checks, it was just business. But when Molly did the same, suddenly it was about arrogance. That double standard couldn't be more obvious. Let's rewind to the weekend before she left. According to Awful Announcing, Sports Business Journal first revealed Molly would depart at year's end. But within 24 hours, she was already gone. Insiders called it an emergency landing.
Up landing. This is an emergency exit. This is an emergency.
The suddenness speaks volumes. Nobody leaves mid-season, especially during football season, unless something explosive is happening. And according to sources, that something was the NBC deal accelerating faster than anyone anticipated. Think about it. If Molly were really leaving on friendly terms, ESPN would have turned it into a farewell spectacle. They would have cashed in on ratings. Instead, Stephen A. had to announce it live on air, his voice cracking like someone completely blindsided.
Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell. But I do think it's important that I started off the show by just acknowledging my love and appreciation for her.
Pay attention to his wording. That's her story to tell. Translation? He knows the truth. He knows it went beyond contracts. But he also knows if he said it outright, it would expose ESPN's inner chaos and his own part in it. Which brings us to the big question whispered around the industry. Did Molly leave to escape Stephen A. himself? The theory is gaining momentum. One analyst didn't mince words.
I look at the abrupt, like, nah, I'm not coming into work tomorrow. That also is like, maybe there's pointing the finger at Stephen A. Smith. I mean, you can play it out to the end of the year and move on to your next deal, but when you don't come in, it makes me think maybe Stephen A. is a part of.
This matters because fans have long suspected friction between them. Molly constantly moderating while Stephen A. bulldozed debates. Molly cutting him short when his rants dragged on. Molly keeping the peace while egos exploded around her. But what if behind the curtain, that tension boiled over? What if NBC wasn't just dangling more money, but a fresh start, far away from Stephen A.'s shadow? Maybe that's why Molly bolted so suddenly. Why she skipped the farewell. Why her Instagram statement didn't even mention Stephen A. by name. Let that sink in. 10 years of working together. And in her closing message, she thanked the fans and the First Take family, but not him. Viewers caught it. Analysts caught it. And Stephen A. definitely caught it. Then came his counter. Subtle and direct, but sharp nonetheless. He pivoted to rants about leverage bosses and knowing your value. He framed her exit as a cautionary tale, as if to warn, see what happens when you push too far? In doing so, he revealed more about himself, because Stephen A. Smith doesn't waste energy on people he doesn't feel threatened by. So, why does Molly's NBC leap shake him this badly? Because, for the first time in years, ESPN's powerhouse looks like he's losing control of the storyline. And that's only the start. The NBC deal that triggered Stephen A.'s outrage. Here's the part ESPN never wanted public. The moment Molly's departure leaked, NBC Sports was already knee-deep in talks. And those discussions weren't centered just on salary. They were about authority. The kind ESPN was never prepared to hand her. Reports suggest ESPN had slotted Molly into smaller side projects once she was moved off First Take. Translation: they were ready to push her into the background. Maybe digital clips, maybe sideline reports, but nothing near the platform Stephen A. commands. That's what soured the negotiations. ESPN higher-ups made their usual bet. She's not irreplaceable. She's not Stephen A. One commentator didn't even sugarcoat it. Interview 10:54, 11 o'clock. NBC, however, saw her differently. In private meetings, they pitched Molly something bold. Not just a hosting chair, but the power to shape the shows themselves. The chance to launch a new flagship morning program to rival ESPN's stronghold. And most importantly, they dangled an executive producer credit. That's leverage. That's ownership. ESPN never even imagined it. When Sports Business Journal first broke that Molly would be leaving at year's end, insiders say ESPN believed they had time. Time to audition replacements. Time to ease her out. Time to control the farewell spin. But Molly didn't wait. She pulled the plug early, stripping ESPN and Stephen A. of the goodbye narrative they thought they controlled. What truly routed ESPN's top offices was NBC's speed. Within mere days, it was clear this wasn't just a talent exit. It was a takeover. And here's where Stephen A. circles back in. Publicly, he played the role of the supportive friend. He called Molly a professional, praised her, wished her success. But insiders say behind the curtain, he was livid, not just because she left, but because she left in a way that made him look powerless. Remember, Stephen A. has built his image as a fixer, the guy who wins contract battles, the man who boasts about being in control. And yet, one of his closest allies walked away and he couldn't stop it. So what did he do? He started sending signals in his monologues. Interview 12/16/12/39. That wasn't some random move. That was a man drawing a line in the sand. Translation: I've got leverage. Molly doesn't. I earned my contract. She didn't. But NBC didn't care about ESPN's internal adder. They cared about image. They cared about grabbing one of ESPN's most visible faces and planting her on their network as proof they could compete. And make no mistake, this was a competition. NBC wasn't just hiring a host. They were delivering a message that screamed, if ESPN will respect its stars, we will. Think about the timing.
They don't need her as much as they actually need Stephen A.
ESPN was in the middle of brutal layoffs, chopping off high-profile names left and right. Analysts gone. Play-by-play voices gone. Studio hosts gone. Meanwhile, Stephen A. strutted untouched with his massive contract. The optics? Ugly. And then Molly left. What better way for NBC to strike than by poaching her and making her the centerpiece of their programming push? The irony? ESPN built this mess themselves, lowballing her, undervaluing her, assuming she'd never walk away. And here's the kicker. NBC didn't just throw her a raise.
Guess what? I don't give a damn what anybody say unless you have the leverage to do it. When you heard me at a time when we were discussing my contract negotiations all over the media and all throughout the sports world, what I talked about was what my worth was based on what the numbers show. I talked about these are the ratings.
They gave her parity. Not Stephen A. money, but close enough to send a loud message. Multiple insiders say her new deal is structured to grow with ratings, podcast expansion, and digital reach. In other words, the exact opportunities ESPN flat out denied her. That's why Stephen A. has been tossing shade nonstop. Because deep down, he knows Molly got the one thing he can't control: freedom. But it gets even messier. Sources claim that in the days after Molly's exit, ESPN bosses flooded Stephen A. with scripted talking points. They pushed him to stress that it was her decision, that ESPN never wanted her gone, and that she'd always be part of the family. And yes, he echoed every line live on air. Interview 1409, 1426. Classic corporate spin. But fans didn't buy it. They saw through the vague words. They caught Stephen A.'s careful phrasing and connected the dots. Molly didn't just leave. She leveled up. And Stephen A.? He was seething. Because here's the dirty secret. When Molly Qerim inked that NBC deal, she did more than boost her own career. She cracked Stephen A.'s empire. A crack no paycheck or monologue can patch. When word of Molly's NBC contract broke, the entire sports media world froze. Not because she found another gig.
But in the end, rather, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately. As you see from her Instagram post, that story is for her to tell. Do I have an idea? Of course I do. Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story.
Everyone saw that coming eventually, but because of how fast and how big the deal was, NBC didn't hesitate. They didn't test run her like ESPN planned with rotating moderators. They went all in. Industry insiders say the contract sits well into 7 figures, structured with performance escalators linked to ratings and digital growth, meaning Molly isn't just collecting checks. She's betting on herself. If her show thrives, she gets paid like a franchise star. And here's the bombshell. Part of her deal reportedly includes cross-network chances, Olympic coverage, NFL features, even late-night crossover slots. That's the kind of spotlight that can launch Molly from sports host to household name. Now compare that to ESPN's offer. A small raise, some vague projects, and zero creative control. They wanted her boxed in. NBC handed her the keys. No wonder she walked away without looking back. And ESPN? They didn't take it quietly. According to multiple reports, the network scrambled to plug the hole left on First Take. Within days, executives launched what insiders nicknamed a casting carousel. Guest moderators rotated in, like Andrews Taylor Steele, while ESPN quietly tested on-air chemistry with Stephen A.
Contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her. But in the end, rather, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately, as you said.
It was chaos, and audiences noticed. Without Molly's steady guidance, First Take felt different. The flow was off. The energy scattered. Stephen is still dominated. But the balance was gone. That's when the narrative flipped. Fans who once slammed Molly for interrupting suddenly realized she had been holding the show together. Without her, debates unraveled. Segments dragged on. The glue had disappeared. Meanwhile, NBC capitalized on the PR goldmine. They positioned Molly not just as a hire, but as a trophy. Their press release praised her decade of experience, her reputation as a stabilizing force, and her vision for something new. It was a direct shot at ESPN, and Stephen A. felt it. He tried to play it cool, speaking fondly of Molly, saying he was sad to lose her. But if you listen closely, the bitterness leaked out. Interview 1641, 1657. That line, that story is for her to tell, is classic Stephen A. He wasn't saying it outright, but the subtext was clear. I know the real story, and it's not what you're being told. That's exactly what fueled speculation. Did Molly leave over money, over power, or simply because she was tired of living in Stephen A's shadow? The timing raised eyebrows. Just days before her exit, Stephen A. had been bragging on air about helping others get paid. Shannon Sharp, Cameron, even Pat McAfee. He painted himself as a kingmaker, the man who decides who eats. No wonder she walked. But the real sting came later. Off camera, insiders claim Stephen A. erupted when he learned the details of Molly's NBC deal. Not just the money, but the title, executive producer. For a man who fought his entire career for control of his platform, watching a former co-host leapfrog into a producer role at a rival network had to burn, especially since ESPN never handed him full control of First Take. That's why a Sirius XM rant cut so deep. He wasn't only talking business. He was venting about Molly, about losing leverage, about watching someone else take the freedom he craves. Because the truth is, Stephen A. isn't used to losing control. He's ESPN's centerpiece, the face of First Take, the man Disney bends over backwards to keep satisfied. And yet here was Molly Qerim, breaking free, signing with NBC, and stealing the spotlight. And make no mistake, this feud is only heating up. The more NBC builds around Molly, the more cracks form in Stephen A.'s empire. ESPN knows it, NBC knows it, and Stephen A. knows it too. The fallout? Molly's leap didn't just rattle ESPN. It lit a behind-the-scenes war. Let's start with the whispers. Multiple insiders say that in the days before Molly's official announcement, Stephen A. Smith made a string of calls, not only to ESPN brass, but to industry contacts. His mission? Find out if NBC was serious. And some allege persuade them to back off. Now, we can't confirm every detail of those calls, but the whispers have been loud. One industry writer noted the odd silence from Stephen A. in the hours after the news broke, speculating he was working the phones, scrambling to contain a fire he never saw coming. But here's the twist. NBC wasn't retreating. They were doubling down. Sources say NBC execs viewed Molly's signing as a calculated power play, a way to finally crack ESPN's dominance over morning sports talk. With the Olympics, the NFL, and Premier League soccer in their arsenal, NBC already had the sports rights. What they lacked was a personality who could carry a daily debate format. Molly fit the description perfectly. And when ESPN learned NBC wasn't just hiring her, but building a show around her, panic erupted. It showed in the way ESPN scrambled through moderators on First Take. One day it was Christine Williamson, the next Malika Andrews, then Elle Duncan. It looked like auditions, because that's exactly what they were. Meanwhile, NBC wasted no time hyping Molly's arrival. Their press release branded her as one of the most trusted voices in sports television, teased a new era of debate programming, and highlighted her decade at ESPN, turning her resume into a trophy. That's when Stephen A. snapped. Fans quickly pieced it together. He didn't say her name, but who else could he mean? Who else had just defined their worth with a groundbreaking deal at a rival network? It was Molly, and his frustration began spilling into public view. But behind the scenes, the drama ran deeper. Multiple outlets reported Stephen A clashed with ESPN executives over how Molly's exit was handled. He allegedly felt blindsided, humiliated that First Take's stability collapsed without warning. One insider described him as furious, pacing, shouting, demanding answers. And here's the kicker. Some even claim he hinted about his own future beyond ESPN. His message was clear. If the network couldn't safeguard First Take, his empire, then maybe it was time to consider alternatives. It was a bluff, of course. ESPN can't afford to lose Stephen A, and he knows that. But the fact he floated the idea shows just how rattled Molly's move left him. The irony? For years, Stephen A thrived on First Take's chaos. Rotating partners, endless clashes, constant change. Yet Molly had been the constant, the anchor, the moderator, the steady balance. Without her, his empire suddenly seemed vulnerable, and NBC knew it. That's why they began quietly hinting that Molly's new show would go head-to-head against First Take, a direct competitor, a daily ratings war. Picture the optics. Stephen A on ESPN, Molly on NBC, both live. Audiences flipping channels. Social media dissecting every segment. Headlines crowning who won the debate battle. It's poetic. The protege becomes a rival. But there's a twist, and it's the part Stephen A dreads most. NBC isn't just giving Molly airtime. They're giving her crossover reach, celebrity interviews, feature specials, even early talks of a primetime project. That's the nightmare scenario. Because suddenly, Molly isn't just his former moderator. She's his competitor. Then came the bombshell. In the weeks following her NBC deal, a leaked audio clip started circulating online. Its authenticity is still debated, but in it, a voice strikingly similar to Stephen A can be heard venting. She thinks she can do this without me. NBC is going to learn fast. It's different when you're not across from Stephen A. Smith. Mark my words, they'll regret it. Again, unverified, but the timing was explosive. Fans pounced, spreading it across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, and the narrative took hold. Stephen A. wasn't just angry. He was resentful, and that resentment only added fuel to Molly's rise. Because the more shade Stephen A throws, the more powerful Molly appears. The harder he pushes a narrative that she overpriced herself, the easier it is for NBC to market her as groundbreaking. The more he reminds everyone that everybody has a boss, the more Molly becomes a face of independence. It's a PR battle Stephen simply can't win. And that's the core of why the saga matters. Because it's not about a single contract or a single network feud. It signals a transformation in sports media. A shift where so-called moderators and sidekicks are no longer satisfied to sit quietly while the marquee names collect the biggest checks. A shift where talent, especially women, demand not just seats at the table, but authority over the table itself. Stephen A. Smith took shots at Molly Qerim, but in doing so, he exposed his own insecurity that the empire he helped shape at ESPN may not be as unshakable as it appears. And Molly? She's proving that sometimes the boldest power move isn't staying. It's walking away. That's the wrap for this video. For more explosive stories like this, check out the cards on your screen.